let's delve into the fascinating realm of labor productivity, an essential measure in economics that sheds light on how economies function and what they prioritize. Economics, at its core, explores how individuals interact with valuable resources. Labor productivity gauges the output generated per hour of work in a specific nation. It's a straightforward calculation, national GDP divided by total hours worked in a year. However, the implications are truly remarkable. Present-day workers are among the hardest working individuals in history, yet also the most efficient. While they may not garner as much sympathy as their counterparts from the Industrial Revolution era, having traded grueling factory floors and coal mines for air-conditioned offices, the modern world presents its own set of challenges. The prevalence of hustle culture and the glorification of certain roles, such as surgeons, investment bankers, and corporate lawyers, have set a precedent of being on call all the time, masquerading as professionalism or teamwork. Expectations and performance indicators continue to be monitored, scrutinized, and increased each year. The discussion around overworking often focuses on its mental health implications rather than its economic impact. For the purposes of this video, we'll set aside the mental health aspect and instead focus solely on the economics of an overworked world. Part of the reason is that there are experts far more qualified to discuss mental health, and part of it is because sometimes change needs to make economic sense in order to happen. So, setting aside the health implications of 100-hour work weeks, we need to answer one crucial question. Does working longer and harder contribute to a more prosperous economy? Yes, that's right. We could be a society of miserable and overworked individuals, and it likely wouldn't change as long as the answer to that question is yes. Economics got us into this situation, so perhaps economics can lead us out of it. Now, if you're watching this video at work, hoping it will justify putting your feet up for the rest of the day while working from home, you might be a little disappointed. Work is undeniably important on an individual level, as it provides income to maintain our quality of life. It also plays a vital role on a national level by providing the amenities we've come to expect in the modern world. Even what we consider essential, such as turning on a tap to get water, flipping a switch to turn on lights, or finding food readily available at the shops. These services are all the result of extensive supply chains involving many dedicated individuals. This might not come as a surprise to those living in developed countries where such conveniences are almost taken for granted. However, this convenience may be part of the problem. We have entered the age of entitlement. If we look back to the early 1900s, we can see a world somewhat similar to our own today. For the first time in history, countries like the United States saw more people living in urban environments than in rural areas. Jobs were the driving force behind this shift, good-paying jobs with defined benefits and expectations. Working for large companies rather than oneself or another family on a farm came with significant perks. Firstly, these jobs typically offered higher pay. Additionally, the income was more predictable. A family working their own farm could face financial ruin after a few bad seasons beyond their control. On the other hand, even if a factory worker's company went out of business, they could likely find work in another factory nearby, a significant advantage for many families. However, this stability came with a trade-off. It was known as marginal utility. A farm's productive capacity ultimately depended on the amount and quality of its land. Once crops were planted and tended to, there was little additional value gained from extra work hours. We explored this concept in our video on whether we need to work 40 hours a week, which delves into insights we won't have time for here. Essentially, a farmer working 100-hour weeks wouldn't make corn grow faster or cows produce more milk. Their best economic approach would be to exert the minimum effort while maintaining a healthy harvest. Please note that this doesn't diminish the hard work of farmers. They undoubtedly work diligently, often harder than one can imagine sitting in a comfortable office. It's simply that their outcomes aren't solely determined by the hours they put in. In contrast, factory workers experienced a different reality. A factory worker assembling gearboxes in a Ford Model T could produce more cars in a 12-hour shift than they could in a 10-hour shift. Their output was directly proportional to their time spent on the task. Consequently, the average worker in the US at that time logged over 60 hours a week. It's worth noting that this figure represents an average. Non-production workers existed, and for every individual working 40 hours a week, there was someone else working 80 hours to maintain the balance. However, this abruptly changed over just 2.5 decades. Between 1913 and 1938, the average working hours in the US plummeted from 58 hours per week to only 37 hours per week, a figure even lower than what we have today. Naturally, significant world events during this period, such as the end of World War I, the Roaring Twenties, and the Great Depression, influenced working arrangements. However, something more significant occurred. Industrial capital became the centerpiece of business. Take a look at factories from the early 1900s, then compare them to car factories in the 1930s, and finally to modern car factories. A common theme emerges: fewer workers utilizing more machinery. The Ford Model T was built using hand tools, the Ford mainline employed heavy machinery, and the Ford F-150 is assembled with minimal human intervention. This shift was advantageous because machinery allowed workers to accomplish the work of many individuals within the same time frame. This efficiency improvement enabled the reduction of working hours by 20 per week while simultaneously increasing GDP. People began envisioning a future where individuals would only need to work 10 hours a week if they needed to work at all. Speculation arose regarding a time when technology would provide all the necessities of life, and in many ways we are living in that future. However, the dream of a leisure-focused lifestyle did not materialize. The first significant hurdle emerged during World War II, which, more than any other conflict, was fought based on industrial potential. Mechanized warfare became the name of the game. Having the most tanks, planes, and ships meant a greater chance of victory. This had two major effects. Firstly, women entered the workforce in large numbers, assuming assembly jobs previously held by men while they were away fighting. Secondly, the war intensified the pressure on individuals to work longer hours. The objective shifted from producing cars for families to manufacturing tanks for soldiers who were genuinely fighting for their way of life. Working extra hours for the nation's defense seemed far more compelling than overtime for a company like Ford. We can see the war's impact quite visibly on the chart, and after its conclusion, the average working hours never truly returned to their pre-war levels. The average working hours of full-time workers have never been as low as they were in the late 1930s, despite significant technological advancements. Why? It's because the United States entered the golden age of entitled capitalism. The 1950s and 1960s witnessed tremendous improvements in living standards for average American families. People moved from cities to suburbs, where they enjoyed larger properties and owned one or two cars. However, this transition came at the expense of free time. Commutes added hours to the workday without increasing actual working hours. Furthermore, businesses catering to this new class of middle-income American consumers had to adjust their schedules to accommodate them. As a result, they began opening on weekends or extending their operating hours. Some of you may remember a time when shops weren't open on Sundays, and if they were, they closed by 1 p.m. If a customer-facing business tried to adhere to such restrictions today, more flexible competitors would quickly surpass them. This extended time frame has a trickle-down effect on everyone. For instance, a standard 9-to-5 middle manager might receive calls from weekend operations during their days off, requiring them to fire up their laptop on a Saturday afternoon to address urgent matters and prevent potential issues over the weekend. Does this sound familiar? Perhaps not for those working in roles entirely unrelated to customer service, but we've become a society obsessed with same-day shipping, 24-hour availability, and the mantra that the customer is always right. We've developed this obsession with flexibility because we need things done immediately since our calendars are packed for the next 2 weeks. Of course, entitled consumers aren't solely responsible for our overworked reality. Technical capital, the machines that were supposed to make us so efficient that we only needed to work 10 hours a week, did indeed improve. We acquired amazing technology that enabled us to produce things almost from scratch with minimal human intervention. However, we also acquired technology that ensured we were always available to answer urgent calls, send quick emails, or resolve issues that couldn't wait until Monday. Many people rightfully look at the chart and think, well, it's not as bad as back when people worked 60-hour weeks. And they would be correct. We are better off today than we were 100 years ago, which is cause for celebration. However, this perspective overlooks one crucial factor. Today, everyone is working long hours. In 1960, around 25% of households had dual incomes, primarily comprised of young couples starting out. Exceptions existed, but they were rare. Now, compare this to today, where over 60% of households have 2 income earners. This reveals the core of the problem. Not only are we gradually working more hours, but a larger portion of those hours is unreported. Moreover, the remaining time we have after commuting is consumed by household chores because the prevalence of dedicated homemakers has significantly declined. The standard 40-hour workweek was designed to allocate 5 days with 8 hours of work, 8 hours for sleep, and 8 hours for leisure. When combined with a 2-day weekend, it was a decent arrangement. Today it might look more like 9 hours at work, 2 hours commuting, 2 hours assisting a working partner with household chores, 4 hours of free time, and 7 hours of sleep. However, this breakdown might even be overly optimistic. A study from 2003 found that full-time working Americans had an average of 3 hours of free time per day, even on weekends. Of that time, only about 1.5 hours were continuous and uninterrupted. Alright, so more people are working longer hours, and they are available for additional hours to meet the demands of an increasingly fast-paced world. Businesses have become more accessible to accommodate people's busy schedules, which were made busy by adapting to this high-demand world. This expanded availability affects everyone. A typical 9-to-5 middle manager might receive calls from weekend operations during their days off to report incidents, forcing them to fire up their laptops at 3 p.m. on a Saturday to prevent potential issues from arising. Sound familiar? To many people, it won't if they work in roles completely removed from any type of customer service. However, we have become a society obsessed with same-day shipping, 24-hour availability, and the belief that the customer is always right. Part of the reason for this obsession is that we need to get things done immediately because we don't have free time available until 2 weeks from now. Entitled consumers aside, there's no denying the impact of globalization and the increased cost of living. However, here's the crux of the matter. Is the fact that people are working longer hours with less free time actually detrimental to the economy? While we know it isn't great for our sanity, let's approach this like cold-hearted economists. What is the value of those hours? If we examine the annual labor hour figures for OECD nations, an intriguing correlation emerges. The nations with the fewest annual working hours are the wealthiest per capita. Germany serves as an excellent example, as it is Europe's wealthiest nation. Yet the average working time for its labor force participants is only 1,363 hours per year. This pattern holds true for countries like the Netherlands, Denmark, and Norway, where the annual working hours remain under 1,500. In contrast, the US clocks in at 1,783 hours per year, while workaholics in Greece, South Korea, and Mexico put in over 2,000 hours per year. Clearly, there's a negative correlation between working hours and wealth. However, the golden rule of statistics is that correlation doesn't imply causation. So what's truly causing this phenomenon? Perhaps these countries can work fewer hours because they are already wealthy. Let's start with Germany, the market leader in this regard. In Germany, work is about work. Lunch breaks are short, team bonding activities are almost non-existent, and once you finish your shift, you're out the door. This is well documented as a result of their non-customer-centric business culture. Tourists are often surprised to find that German hotels and shops don't offer the same level of flexibility as they might encounter in the US. That's because customers are seen as equals, not entities to be overly catered to. The same attitude applies to working overtime, where putting in extra hours is not perceived as a sign of commitment, but rather as a sign of inefficiency. These practices offer significant benefits. Firstly, German workers generate more output despite working fewer hours. Their roles are typically well-defined and closely monitored for output. To impress your boss, you work more efficiently. You don't answer text messages on a Sunday. Moreover, this approach leaves more time in the day for other pursuits. This additional time could be used for training to enhance skills and become even more efficient workers. However, Germany falls behind in this area as well. Only 33% of German workers aged 25 to 35 have any form of tertiary education, well below the OECD average of 44.9%. So despite working fewer hours and having lower education levels, these countries fare better than their overworked counterparts. Free time is crucial for several reasons. Firstly, it allows people time to shop, even if the shops don't bend over backward to accommodate the consumer's every demand. Secondly, it helps avoid slack labor. Most modern roles should be based on output and results, rather than time spent in a chair. Giving people the freedom to work towards results means they can potentially take on a second job, where they can once again work towards achieving outcomes instead of adhering to a set number of hours. Even if they choose not to work a second job, they'll be more refreshed and efficient when they return to their desks, as they haven't been overworked. Remember the labor productivity measure we discussed at the beginning of the video? It measures output over hours worked. A nation will perform much better on this metric if the hours worked are undertaken by well-rested and results-driven workers. This concept leads us to the final advantage of more leisure time in society. It provides people with the opportunity for entrepreneurship. One of the biggest obstacles to starting a business for most people is finding the time to do so. Many individuals can't afford to quit their day jobs and forego regular income while launching a new venture. As a result, potentially million-dollar ideas remain unrealized because people lack the capacity to bring them to fruition. Take this YouTube channel, for example. Many viewers probably have ideas for their own videos, but most of those ideas will never come to fruition because making videos requires a significant amount of time and effort that people in modern professional roles simply don't have to spare. While a single YouTube channel won't change the world, a collective of people working on passion projects can yield exciting results. In conclusion, work is crucial, and until the robot revolution arrives, it will continue to be important. However, like all good things, work is best used in moderation. We've fallen into a trap of chasing the last few hours of free time in our lives. Has this pursuit made us richer? Well, we have become richer while doing so, but the statistics are starting to tell a different story. Finding a solution is challenging because no business wants to be the first to shut off their phones to customers. While we're stuck in this stalemate, we live in a world where we're at least partially on call. On an individual level, if you truly want to fight the good fight, consider setting aside a day per week like Sunday, where you don't make any purchases. Individually, it might not make a significant impact, but if we gradually challenge the notion that we have the right to buy at any given time, we might all be better off.